Hi, I'm Nan Simonson, and I recently heard a podcast, which I will reference, and was quite taken by what I learned. The podcast was led by Rich Roll, the interviewee, Naidoo. She is a nutritional psychiatrist and MD. She's also a nutritional biologist and she's a trained chef. Isn't that interesting? I am listening to her book on Audible as well. And she has quite a story because a lot of what she learned to write the book, her second book, Calm Your Brain with Food, which is the one that was the subject of the interview that I heard. This is a copy of the cover of the book because I have it on Audible. The first book, This Is Your Brain on Food, is arriving today sometime. And so I didn't make a copy of that. I was hoping that it would be here in time, but I should have known better. So I'm going to go ahead and read you my notes because although I have a point to make at the end of this that has to do with eating disorders, disordered eating, discomfort with food, a lack of success in whatever area of nutrition one may be aiming for. I'm going to be ending with my own epiphany. And it has a lot to do with what she is discussing. And interesting, while she was researching for this book, she also had her own epiphany as it related to challenges that she has had, anxiety that she has had, and even a history that goes back to childhood that she had, all of which helped me say, wait a minute, is this where this all came from? And I'll be a little less cryptic in just a little bit. But let me just go through these notes that I put together from several sources, and then I'll talk to you about what I hope you can relate to in some way or another. But from all of this, there will be something you can learn. Naidoo, and it's Naidoo. She's Indian, MD, Harvard nutritional psychiatrist, nutritional biologist, trained chef, founder and director of the first and only hospital-based nutritional and metabolic psychiatric service in the United States at Massachusetts General Hospital. Wrote 2 books. But I saw her initially during a podcast that she did relatively recently to promote her second book with Rich Roll. And the name of the podcast, if you're looking for that, you could simply put in Rich Roll and Naidoo, Naidoo, on YouTube and bring it up, but it might bring up her previous interview with him. The name of this one is Harvard Nutrition Expert, These Foods Fuel Anxiety. Harvard Nutrition Expert, These Foods Fuel Anxiety. And those of you who watch this on YouTube, you're going to see the link for that video and that interview. All right. She has 2 bestsellers. Her first one written in August or released in August of 2020, This Is Your Brain on Food. And again, remember, she's a psychiatrist, a nutritional psychiatrist. And the second one, Calm Your Mind with Food, which is the one that I have a copy of the cover because, again, I have it on audio, was written just a few months ago in December of 2023. Let me tell you about the book. With more than 70% of our country overweight and 40% of those total obese, the irrefutable damage that comes from that to our bodies, we know leads to a health crisis in this country and bespeaks the possibility that we don't get food right here. The United States is also facing an unprecedented anxiety crisis. At the same time, scientific and medical knowledge about these conditions is rapidly increasing, with massive strides being made in our understanding of the complex relationship between the mind and the gut. In this groundbreaking guide that is Calm Your Mind with Food, Dr. Naidoo presents cutting-edge research about the ways anxiety is rooted in our brain, our gut, our immune system, and our metabolism. I'm going to say that again because we know that what we eat, not necessarily how we eat it, how we live our life, how we, live the pillars of lifestyle medicine, but we'll get to that. We know that what we eat affects our body. What I don't think we realize is how it affects our mind and how that could have a profound effect on the way we live our lives and even down to our mood. So I'll say again, anxiety is rooted in our brain, our gut, our immune system, as well as our metabolism. Drawing on the latest science on the connection between diet and anxiety, Dr. Naidoo shows us how to effectively use food and nutrition as an essential tool for calming the mind. In Your Mind on Food, she explains how inflammation affects everything from anxiety and depression to Alzheimer's, and in other words, to our mental health. How also, she explains how trillions of bacteria living in our gut are key to controlling anxiety as well as inflammation. And we call that the microbiome. You know, I took for granted that everybody knew what the microbiome was and is, because after the microbiome project ended, a 12-year study several years ago, there's been so much about that. But I mentioned that at several events where I was speaking, and I got a blank stare. They didn't know what I was referring to. I'll simply say the microbiome is everywhere in our body and all of our openings. It's on our skin, and it's bacteria, archaea, which is the most ancient form of a living cell, fungus, yeast. It's living pathogens that can be dangerous, or also elements that can be very not only safe but life-giving. And those bacteria congregate primarily in the gut, primarily in the colon. Some estimate that that alone can weigh 3 to 5 pounds, and that by far there are trillions more cells in our microbiome than there are in our body. So are we carrying the microbiome and then driven by the effects of that microbiome? Some say that is the case. So that's what we're talking about. She describes that much better than I did. But I just wanted to enlighten those that weren't sure what I was talking about or she is referring to. She talks about 6 pillars for calming the mind, about what we eat balancing or destroying our leptin receptors. The key peptide, leptin is a key peptide that links the central nervous system to the metabolism processes, which include our ability to understand and feel full. How to incorporate specific anxiety-busting foods in our diet, from the obscure ashwagandha to the ubiquitous vitamin C, and the best diets for managing symptoms of anxiety and depression, and mood disorders, along with guidelines for creating your own personal anti-anxiety meal plan and dozens of super nutrient-forward, delicious recipes. Calm your mind with food will help you boost your immunity, reduce anxiety, enhance your overall mental well-being, but I'll also say possibly enlighten you in things that you can apply in your own life and then apply to improve your own life. At one time, medications were all that we knew to treat people with anxiety and depression with. Thorazine, way back when I was, well, if you read Aging Powerfully, which is a book I wrote 3 years ago, I mentioned how at 14, in a fit of desperation, I'll say, and discouragement, I downed a bottle of Thorazine and ran into a field, not caring if I ever saw another day at 14. And thank goodness Thorazine didn't kill you, but that was a very, very early antidepressant, mood-altering drug that was prescribed to my older brother. He was 15 at the time. So there's a bit of this in my family. And then there was Prozac and Zoloft and Celexa and Lexapro and Paxil and Luvox. These are SSRIs. The first two were not. The Thorazine and the I don't think I mentioned benzodiazepine. My brother lived on that for a long, long time. I had most of these prescribed to me, the other ones, throughout my lifetime. These medications are commonly prescribed for depression, anxiety disorder, or other mental health conditions. But as she says, these don't fix anything, and they quite often demand the elevating of doses because we become adjusted to the feelings and still look to feel better. And that's not the answer. Dr. Naidoo speaks of 6 pillars of lifestyle to help manage anxiety and promote overall mental well-being. They include nutrition, and we'll talk about that. Well, I'll read you this paragraph. Which includes the importance of a balanced diet rich in whole foods, including fruits, vegetables, lean proteins. And although she grew up a vegetarian, has never eaten meat, she doesn't require that patients go vegan. Lean proteins, lean healthy proteins is what she refers to. And yet in her case, it would mean seeds and nuts and beans and high protein grains, etc. So lean proteins, healthy fats, incorporating foods that support gut health, reducing inflammation, as well as fermented foods. And I'll get to some of the others. That's number 1. 2, physical activity. And you're going to hear this and say, wait a minute. I always talk about lifestyle as medicine, and these are all part of lifestyle as medicine. Nutrition, physical activity, sleep, prioritizing sleep, mindfulness, stress reduction, social connectedness. It's so easy to overlook or negate the relevance of social connectedness in our lives. And yet I look back at that and I think, oh my gosh, part of the perfect storm. And purpose and meaning. She stresses that the number 1 tool we have is our diet, stressing that the gut-brain connection, especially through the vagus nerve, can set us up for a life of joy or a life of challenge. The key concepts in her book, as I said, include the importance of reducing inflammation for mental health, increasing the health of the gut microbiome, nutritional strategies to help alleviate challenges in different, I'll say, parts of our body, from the brain to the gut to, let's say, joint interaction and pain, a lot of which can have a lot to do with the endocrine system. Anti-anxiety diets she talks about, and personalized meal plans. So what is she talking about when she says, all right, let's incorporate specific foods into your diet and avoid others to help reduce anxiety? The foods to eat include fermented foods rich in probiotics such as yogurt. If you are familiar with my channel, YouTube, Nan Simonson, you'll see a delicious, inexpensive yogurt recipe that one of the people in my PowerPoints group, and you're listening to this while a gallery of attendees for the PowerPoints meeting is waiting, because when we finish, we'll have a conversation about this. But one of the attendees, her name is Valerie, I won't do her last name, introduced us to a yogurt that is, well, you know what? Did I do something wrong with her name? I think I did. Oh, shoot. Anyway, now I'm all flustered because I think, and I do this sometimes where I can't think of something that I know and I know it really well. I'll get back to this in just a minute. Oh, well, it's too late. But I think it's Valerie. Shared a recipe for making our own. Oh, Stephanie. There's a V in the last name. Thank you. You saved me. So it's Stephanie, and then there's a V in the last name, is a member who said, oh, I've got this yogurt that I make that takes a carton of soy milk and a starter that you can make from the batches of yogurt that you make. So when we talk yogurt, now I have an easy and expensive and perfectly lean source of clean and lean source of yogurt, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, all with living organisms, because that's all part of what our microbiome loves. Leafy greens, vegetables like spinach, kale, Swiss chard are high in folate and magnesium, which are essential for brain health and reducing inflammation. Omega-3 foods like fatty fish or walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds will help reduce inflammation and support brain health. Antioxidant-rich foods, berries, dark chocolate, green tea, all high in antioxidants, which help protect the brain from oxidative stress. Whole grains, foods like whole oats or rolled oats, quinoa, brown rice provide a steady release of glucose, which helps maintain and stabilize blood sugar and keep our moods on a level playing ground. Vitamin C rich foods, citrus fruits, bell peppers, broccoli support the adrenal function and help reduce stress. And herbs and spices like turmeric and ginger and ashwagandha, anti-inflammatory properties of which can help support brain health. What are the foods that we should avoid? Processed foods, number one on that list. Processed foods, high in unhealthy fats and sugars. And the big deal here is also the additives that these foods have, the gums, the emulsifiers. Like when you see soy lecithin or lecithin, soy lecithin on a label, it sounds benign, but lecithin is an emulsifier. We don't want to emulsify our microbiome. And there are so many foods that we buy at fast food restaurants, from restaurants, packaged, that are stabilized, made easier to eat, made easier to store, made cheaper, if filled with things that have nothing to do with real food and yet disrupt our gut, our health, our not only adrenal system, but also our cardiovascular system. So processed foods, again, high in fat, sugars, additives, these foods can disrupt not only the microbiome, but have a negative effect, direct negative effect on mental health. Sugary foods and drinks. Excess sugar intake can lead to blood sugar spikes and crashes, exacerbating anxiety symptoms. Refined carbohydrates, foods like white bread, pastries, sugary cereals, those muffins that are ubiquitous. Everywhere you go, I'll just get a muffin and a cup of coffee. Those things wreak havoc on our blood sugar levels and cause mood swings. Artificial sweeteners, ingredients like aspartame, sucralose, all negatively impact health. I had an experience with that. We were at Costco and fellow was showing the Vitamix and he was making smoothies and I tasted his smoothie. It was all fruit. And I said, wow, that's really good. And he said, oh, and I said, I have a Vitamix. I wouldn't do without it. And he said, well, do you have this protein powder? And he said, it's all plant-based. It's pea and rice-based. And the front of it said 1 gram sugar, which is a fraction of, 1 gram. God, what would 1 gram of sugar be? I don't even know if it would be a half a teaspoon, if even that. And anyway, it looked good. I bought the darn thing, $36, $37. I got it home and I tasted it. I thought, there's no way this isn't sweetened. I looked at it, which I should have done at the store, and it had 5 grams per serving of erythritol, which is a sugar alcohol that is highly disruptive to our gut microbiome. So it's just sitting there in an area that I keep things that have further purpose. That means it's going right back to Costco when I get back there. There's no way I would have that. And yet it's everywhere in our foods that are supposed to be healthier, no added sugars. They use the artificial sugars and they can get away and around that. Caffeine, while moderate amounts may be fine for some, excessive caffeine intake or later in the day intake can cause anxiety, disrupt sleep patterns, which can disrupt our attitude during the day substantially. And then alcohol. It can disrupt and affect neurotransmitter balance, leading to increased lack of or challenges in focus, and is a brain neurotoxin. By focusing on nutrient-dense whole foods and avoiding these, which negatively impact our gut and our brain, she provides a dietary approach to help manage and reduce anxiety with these simple, maybe not always easy to implement changes that we can make in our diet. So I believe most of the people that look at my channel know that they're going to hear about whole food plant-based. That's why I wrote Aging Powerfully. It's partial memoir, and then the word powerfully is 10 lifestyle modalities that, as a health and wellness coach at a lifestyle medical practice, I have seen remarkable instances of recovery from what looked like intractable, challenging, either chronic diseases or injuries, when people improve their diet and therefore improve themselves at a cellular level. So I wrote the book 3 years after joining as a health coach, and that was a little more than 3.5 years ago. But I also write something else in the book, and that's the part of this talk that led me to use the word an epiphany. What I talked about in the book, and this is a really sensitive subject, and I'm not comfortable even getting into it, and so I've sort of avoided getting much into it in the past, and that is my history with food. Um, it's written in the books, and so it's not a secret, but writing the book made me sit down and think about how and why it was possible, and with what means it was possible for me to go from 14, the age of 14, when I became anorexic shortly after that incident of downing that bottle of Thorazine and running off into a field, and 67, when I finally was able to leave behind what came out of that incident, because I was anorexic, passed out at a gym class. They said, you either start eating or we're taking you to a hospital, locking you up. So I started eating, but I'm just quoting my book, my brother, who was into working out with weights and fitness, said, well, then just throw it up if you have to eat it. Well, that doesn't help you ultimately, but it was a way I learned, even though he stopped relatively quickly, I learned to de-stress. And until 67, when I finally left bulimia behind, that was my way to distress. And I listened to Dr. Naidoo and thought to myself, I was in the perfect storm. She talked in her, and this is where it kept pinging. Oh, that, and oh, that, and oh, that. She talked about ACEs, adverse childhood events, and her own ACEs. And I thought, okay, that was part of it. And it's really easy to say, well, you just get past it. You decide it's not going to bother you. But there are certain things that keep coming up that leave one feeling vulnerable in the world. And even though I dismissed that for, well, most of this time, I had to say, okay, that was real. The ADHD, which went undiagnosed until I was 57, there was no knowledge about that when I was a kid. And yet I was severely affected by dyslexia and ADHD. That added to anxiety. That added to a need to be comforted. Well, things didn't go real well at my home, and there wasn't anyone to comfort me. I fell into first the anorexia, then the bulimia. And you know what? As I said, that haunted me until I was 67 years old. Well, did I just take it and ignore it? No, I went to therapist after therapist. Just about every pill I named, I took at one time thinking that would take care of it. It never did. There was stress, there was damage from the binging and the foods that I would eat that disrupted my gut. I didn't know anything about that. That were leptin disruptors. Nobody knew what leptin was, which meant that I could never tell when I was full. And so I would just keep eating. It never mattered. And the problem with bulimia, some people think, well, and I just hate to say this because somebody will think, oh, well, then that's what I'll do. Don't do it. Some people would think, well, if you could just eat and throw up and stay thin, well, then who cares? I don't know if any of you have ever been sick and had to vomit. It's miserable. And yet I could do that if I was on a whacked out day with whacked out anxiety or loneliness or depression in those younger years. And then even after being married, even after owning my own company, where people looked at me and thought, wow, she has it all together. She's so good at what she does. She's so talented. I had a secret because I knew what I did to stave off the effects of stress or loneliness or anxiety in other ways. I would just sit down with who knows what. I could polish off more food than a football team because I could go all day. It's nasty to think of. It was no fun and it was painful. And yet I did that for year after year. And then I was able to stop. And I credited, and I did in the book, stopping to the book Brain Over Binge by Katherine Hansen, MS, Master's in Science, who wrote a book about learning to ignore the urges when one got urges to eat. I learned about that. I learned where those urges came from the limbic system, from the lizard brain. And I learned to do that. But what I also attributed it to was a whole food plant-based diet, not quite understanding how that could have made the difference, even though that sounds really naive for me to say. But hearing Dr. Naidoo talk about leptin resistance when one is eating processed foods, hearing her talk about how processed foods are so disruptive and raise anxiety, it was a perfect storm. There was so much converging that led me on a path I didn't want to be on. Every day I thought to myself, I don't want to do this anymore, and yet freed me up when I made a decision that I was going to go plant-based. All of my numbers were, that's all in the book, my numbers were looking really bad. Everybody wanted a piece of me, the cardiologist, the rheumatologist, the endocrinologist, cardiologist, because everything was going wacky. And I knew enough about nutrition. I had just become a certified health coach, or was about to with my certification. And I said, no, I'm going to go plant-based. That's what they say will make a difference. Dr. McDougall, the late Dr. McDougall, had a lot to do with that, with his starch solution, because I was all about Atkins. Don't eat starches. They'll kill you. They'll make you fat. And yet they are, and I say this to anyone that will listen, a whole food plant-based starch is nature's appetite suppressant and antidepressant and comfort food. I could eat what I wanted without measuring or weighing, felt good. And because I didn't choose to deviate, I stayed away from the processed foods, and I stayed away from the sugary stuff that they actually scared me. It has been almost 6 years, and there's no looking back. I'm completely secure knowing that I'll never do that again. It was awful enough that I would never want to, but also as long as I continue to do what this woman who is a doctor, nutritional psychiatrist, as well as nutritional biologist and chef, through research, current research, was able to prove led me down the road to anxiety, which I alleviated, couldn't do it with pills, with a eating disorder. But then when I avoided those foods that she's saying, avoid these, they cause problems, became free of. And so many people, and that's why in the title of this talk, I talked about eating disorders, my perfect storm, what is yours? If something is disordered in your life, be it food-based or anything, if you can find a source or many sources that have converged, a background of sources, early childhood events, and stressors and additional, let's say, additional excuses or reasons to continue to hurt yourself, which I did, until you decide, I don't want that anymore, and I know that I have found the answer. All I have to do is comply. Just comply. On the other side of that is such freedom, such health. In 6 years, I've aged backwards. I don't even think about the food I eat, because I can eat until I'm full, eat more, weigh less, unless I start getting messy with things and get too used to certain things that get a little bit too calorically dense, a little bit too close to being sweet to the level or to the degree that I think I want more sweet. I want more sweet. I want more sweet. I can titrate back and be right back in equanimity. I don't know that I said that as well as I wanted to, but I said it. And it allowed me to get out what was like lighting my brain on fire when I was listening to Dr. Naidoo speak. So I want to recommend you consider watching the interview with her and Rich Roll. And if anything in there speaks to you, consider her books. The woman is brilliant. She is so cutting edge that when the Minister of Health of the EU, was it the EU or was it the UK? I'm going to say UK, heard her speak. He invited her to England. They had a conversation, and she is now the representative of the from Mass General of the American ambassador into the UK, introducing this to the country, the idea that through food, through health, they can modify anxiety. And actually, if you think about this, and maybe I'm speaking way out of my wheelhouse, but if we're a country of people that eat processed foods, most of what's on the list of foods to avoid, then we're a country that is highly anxious, highly reactive, highly dissatisfied, and maybe if we could start taking better care of ourselves as individuals, we could take better care of each other as, well, people living together to make a better life. I'll leave it at that. I hope you're having a great day, because I know I'm going to. And give me a thumbs up, subscribe, or share this. And thank you for listening.